just so that you know who or what you're dealing with. I'm a supernumerary minister, and I've been in the Bristol district now for 15 years, but 5 years as a supernumerary. And the care of environment has been sort of in part of my being, I think, for a much longer period than that. My first sort of encounter with ecology was at school, where I had a particularly good biology teacher who talked to us about systems and the way that the whole thing worked together. And that started me off. And then at various punctuation points in my life, I've gone back to this area of environment and environmental concern. We lived, my wife and I, for a year in India. And although we'd never been bird watchers before, the bird life there is quite incredible. And so we became bird watchers, and we still do a bit of it, though we're not twitchers by any means. And then as I developed, there was a broadening understanding of faith, the impact of Celtic Christianity. And then I was fortunate, I got in on the sabbatical things very early and got 5 in my ministry. And the third one of them I spent with a Bible teacher who I'd met a long time previously in India. And he was involved in environmental movement from a Christian point of view. And then the church that I was minister of in Cornwall had a link with Zimbabwe. And again, the church there was getting deeply involved in things like permaculture. And my final sabbatical after that allowed me to really focus. I got a sabbatical in my last year in ministry and went to visit A Rocha in Portugal and to see the work that they were doing and to be able to reflect for the period of 13 weeks on the environment was equipping me in a very special way. Now, what do you do when a supernumerary sits down? Well, you take on new stuff, don't you? And so I became coordinator of a ecumenical group in Bath and Northeast Somerset, and then we've set up a village environment group, and then I've become the coordinator of the Bristol District Environment Team. So that's me. That gives you a bit of background. I'm not an expert, but just someone who's become very interested in this and very deeply concerned with where we're at. So the question we're looking at tonight is why be an eco district? And to do that, we need to set an eco district into context. And the first context is of our current situation. I hope you're up to doing just a little bit of work now. John is going to show you 15 images. And I don't want you to try and analyze them. I don't want you to try and sort of say, get too deeply into them. Just let them speak to you and see what emotions and what feelings those produce as you see them. So there's going to be 15 images. They'll be up for about 4 or 5 seconds each. So you haven't got long. And just have a look at these and see what they say to you and what impact they have on you. I just wanted to ask you, just as you reflect on those, and I was going to use the chat room, but I think just speak out. What are the negative emotions that you felt with those photographs, and what were the positive ones? What struck you as, yeah, that lifts me up, and what things caused you concern and worry and weighed you down a bit? Far away. You'll need to unmute to do it.
I think what struck me was the contrast between the beauty of the natural world and the injustice that we see through human activity, really, and the greed that drives so much of what the Western world particularly has done over the past 50, 60, 70 years, really.
Other responses?
A roller coaster of emotions and a reminder that every picture we saw was of the same world. And so just a reminder for me of just how in the one world we can have such beauty, but also real challenges and deprivations, and the heartache of seeing how some people live compared to how I and others live.
I found it interesting how it feels to see the beautiful pictures, the ones that I like to see, and you would show when you were talking and leading prayers on the wonder of creation, and then the pictures that aren't so beautiful because they show pollution and they show poverty and injustice, and the fact that they were all mixed in together, I think, had a really powerful impact. Really, the kind of horror of some of the photos was greater because we were looking at how beautiful the world can be as well.
I think I was struck by the ferocity or the power in creation, but also the fragility. The bird looked so very fragile, not to mention some of the people.
I was thinking that the positive images were sadder, because that's what we're losing at the moment. They echoing the comment about the fragility, that those are the things we're losing, and they felt sadder to me than the more obviously desperate images.
I think the phrase "there's no planet B" came to me. We can't go to the corner shop and get the second one, and we broke this one.
My reaction to the oil rig slightly surprising, because in some ways it was shocking, but equally there was something about human endeavor that I was kind of like thinking, we worked out, I have no idea how they work out to build an oil rig. I can't get my head around how you do that. So if we can do that, and I hear what Hilary said earlier about the greed that's driven a lot of that, but if there's the need, then maybe there's an ingenuity to tackle some of it, which is, I was not expecting that when I was reflecting. Once I got past looking at my cat that was in my camera line a lot of the way.
I found, hello? Am I?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay. I was struck by, I was surprised when I saw the people on the rubbish heaps and the ones in water, knee-deep water. Obviously people in distress, but in another way, the potential, because those are the people who can help. In a way, sifting the rubbish heap tips has to be done, and sadly we export a lot of our rubbish, and it's our rubbish that may be on those rubbish heap tips, and yet in the end, to put the world right, we all have to play a part, and there's a potential for all those people too, and it's the world God's made us. God, he's made the world, and he's made all of us. And we all have, there's always potential for everyone to play a part in putting it right again. That's a bit oblique, but
yeah. I mean, those images are the context in which we're working, and the positive images, whether they produce in us that sense of fragility or just the beauty, are those which create within us that sense of wonder and joy. And I think that's a vital element of what we need to maintain, but also the negative ones: anger, distress, anxiety, impotence in the face of it all. And I think those are the fundamental reactions that we see around us, and that they're the setting in which we find our work as Methodist districts. We need to recognize those fundamentals, and we need to be able to address them, so that people can enhance the joy, but also to be able to address the anxieties and the worries and the concerns. And that's the place where our Methodist districts are set, And part of our calling, I think, is to protect and encourage and enhance the positives. To say, how can we actually create within our congregations that sense of joy and that sense of love for creation? Because without that, we are not going to care for this world at all. That's fundamental to our work. But we also need to find ways of addressing the negatives, both within our society and within our churches. And that's not about just about major actions to change the way things are moving, but it's also about addressing what individual people are facing. So when we set up in Bath and North East Somerset, a thing called Cafe Baines, which is Christian Action for the Environment in Baines, which is our local authority, we had a woman came to the first meeting. She was part of the Green Party. She was deeply worried about the future of her children in a warming world. And she came to that meeting. And one of the things she said to us was, this is the first time I've been able to find support in a Christian network for my environmental concerns. And I think it's vital that we are, as districts and as Methodist churches, Methodist circuits, Methodist districts, addressing some of those anxieties and concerns that members of our churches bring to the present situation. And that context is important, but as churches, we also need to be able to offer more. We need to offer what goes beyond crisis. We need to be able to recognize that our creation care is about the world as it is and the world as it should be, and not just as the world in a mess. Do you see the difference I'm saying? We can become crisis driven, but we need to be able to look at the world with all its potential, its possibility. But I think also as churches and as Christians, we've often felt marginalized. But I don't know, well, you may have heard this before, but if not, in 2007, a panel of experts gathered by the Environment Agency were asked, what are the 50 things that can save the planet? I'll give you number one, which was dramatically improve the energy efficiency of electrical goods. Does anyone know what number two was?
Get faith groups involved.
Yep, absolutely. It was religious leaders to make the environment a priority for their followers. And our contribution is needed. In 2016, the author Amitav Ghosh wrote a book called The Great Derangement, and it challenged the literary community to take the climate emergency seriously. And for me, that book from a secular author had a bombshell towards its end, because what he said was, the great hope I have for the countering the present environmental crisis is that faith leaders can bring their people to address it. And he said that not just because, as he said at one point, there's an awful lot of people in the faith communities, but he said it also because we have a different perspective on things, a longer time scale than our politicians do, and that we have a vital part to contribute to the whole care of creation. Now, I know that Margaret Hodgson, when she spoke to you a few weeks back, did the theology, but I just needed to do a little bit of theology, because I think there's 4 things which I think we bring, particularly from a Methodist point of view, into this discussion of the environment. And we're going to pop up a slide in a moment, I think. There we are, the theological setting for the district. And the first thing seems a gloomy place to start, but we need to bring our doctrine of sin, a recognition that the roots of the emergency lie within us. And I come across people who want to shift responsibility. Just this last week, I've been in a correspondence with a man on Facebook, and he kept telling me that it was all about sun spot activity and the like, that it's nothing to do with human agency. And it seemed as if he was just trying to push responsibility aside, to say, you know, we aren't responsible, but we are. And we need to take responsibility. There is a real place for, as I think Margot was talking about it last time, for the idea of lament, and also for repentance. And that entails us taking responsibility. The second doctrine, which I think comes in here, and it's the next part, that can we just pop that next one up? It's the doctrine of grace. We are not gloomy. We have the understanding that God is a God of grace and a God of salvation, and that God is at work, and that leads us out of the gloom into hope. We have a God-given sense of hope in a gracious and transforming God. And we need to bring that into the whole debate and discussion, the whole way of seeing the world. Paul in Romans talks about the creation standing on tiptoe, waiting for that salvation to come about. And we need to be able to impart to the world a sense of hope. So that's the next element. The third element is that hope is often ultimate hope, but it needs to be turned into present action. We need to live with the understanding that the world, that hope needs to be lived out and brought into the present moment. And the fourth thing I think we have to recognize is that we are empowered. The doctrine of the Spirit, the power to change. And if you want to put that into Methodist jargon, well, the first part of that is to take is the doctrine of sin. Then we have the doctrine of salvation, doctrine of sanctification, and the doctrine of complete sanctification by the power of the Spirit. And I think, again, we have something to bring into the whole debate. Recently, Transition Bath, which is a wonderful organization in the city of Bath, they've just produced a 5-week course for people who can do with their neighbors to look at the environmental crisis. It's called Eco Together. And its first session seeks to address the sense of impotence by identifying 4 powers that we have to effect change. And they talk about our lifestyle, about community, about advocacy, and about communication. They say, you've got those powers to change things. Very good. But I think we Christians need to say we also have the power of the Spirit. So everything we do within our work as districts has to reflect those elements, that we take responsibility, that we have hope, that we are going to be people who are active, and that we are going to rely on the power of the Spirit. So that sets the context. But the last thing I think we need to just do, and then I'll just open for a moment for question and answers, and then we'll look at practicalities. We're talking today about being an eco district, but Methodism has a strange relationship with districts. We're not quite sure we've got them, but we're not quite sure what we ought to do with them. And we keep discussing what should we do. But if you look and go into some of the documents we have, there are some easy headings that are there for us to see. And we'll put another slide up, I think. This is what the district is supposedly about. You can answer whether it is. The first thing is the advancement of headed. The first thing that it says in Standing Order 400 in my latest edition of CPD, it may have changed, but so advancement of mission. It's about bringing circuits together. So that's the next bullet point, hopefully. Yeah, bringing circuits together. So we actually enable circuits to be built up by one another. The third factor is the deployment of personnel and finance. So that should be there. Oh, sorry, no, engaging society in the region. I've changed my order here. Yeah, so engaging society. We're about, because we're in a place, that's the society where we're living, and we need to engage that society in the place we are. Then it should come up with finance and personnel. And then the district is there to be a link between the connection and the circuits and churches. And finally, it says it's about organising large initiatives. So that's what the district is about. That's and a bit more. I'm sure you could find more things that you'd want to add to that list. And so when we work as a district, that's what we are about. That's our context. And what a Methodist district is how we relate to that context that we're living in. So I'm just put up for a moment Q&A, just to stop so you don't just have me talking at you. Any questions or answers or first responses on that?
If I may, partly because of some other things I'm doing, the notion of district is in flux. We have everything from 2 tiny island districts, well, 3 if you count Shetland, which is a slightly special case, through to soon a huge district stretching from the Scottish border to Manchester. And it's becoming clearer and clearer that different districts are going to be operating differently. Now, we're still the district as was and has been for more than 50 years. But I mean, I was interested in your list, which is accurate, drawn from standing orders. I know that, but it's in a way becoming so variable now that I think there is a problem. I mean, I'm entirely in favour of us ploughing on and seeking to become an eco-district in our present mode, but I think we need to be careful not to think this is similar for everybody any longer, because it ain't.
I mean, I think that's been the case in a lot of areas of life. I mean, when my first degree was in politics and economics, and I can remember studying public administration, and you had a very clear structure of local authorities. That has gone. You talk about a local authority, you're talking about different beasts in different sizes. And I think we've just got to try and we say, well, this is where we are at the moment. Let's go with it. If it changes, we'll change. But let's see how we go for the moment. Anything else?
Just by way of confession, I actually work for the district. Right. That's my job. I'm the net zero officer for our district. So I guess a lot of this is quite centralized where we are. And there are quite a lot of district officers that I think a lot of other districts don't have. So again, I think echoing both of your points, districts have very different ways of dealing with these things, and it's not one size fits all, but I think we can still learn from each other, regardless of how we may be structured.
Sorry, Ian. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's really important. The bit you talked a bit about the taking responsibility, the hope. That's really important in my reading with my intergenerational stuff. How a lot of young adults and young people think the church is silent on this issue, and that's one of the reasons why maybe we don't keep as many young adults as perhaps we could have done. So we do need to present not just a false hope, but a living hope within that. And to me, I've never seen why the church is silent on creation and care for it. I don't understand why people think that we're that. But there's a big report a few years ago from Tear Fund called Burning Down the House, which really touched in on this whole area that young people see the church as silent, and they're not looking to us for hope. So that's a big weakness for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's been the case for a long while. When I was in the Cornwall district, we had a fair in the town where I was stationed, and the church was at the top of the hill, and we decided to have an eco section in the church, so exhibitions of various organizations. And it was very interesting that I mean, this is going back now 20 years probably. Somebody from one of the secular organizations turned to somebody from our church and said, "Why are you interested in this?" With the great assumption that we weren't going to be interested in it, that this wasn't what we were about. And I think we've got a big job to do. But I'm encouraged that, for instance, about a month ago, Bath Abbey had the thing called Gaia. I don't know whether you've seen it. This huge earth that hangs and rotated in the middle of the abbey for hours. And we had an eco fair there, and it was the church that was hosting it. It was the church that people came into to be part of this using this space that was available. So I think there is, but I think you're right. We need to start saying a bit more about why we're involved. Let me move on then, and let me tell you a little bit about where we are in the Bristol district and some of the elements of which we've been working on over, and some we're hoping to work on. Bristol district was the district that actually proposed the climate emergency to conference back in about 2018. And that set us on the present path in relation to creation care. And then at the beginning of the year, as you've heard, we became the first Bronze Award Eco District. I think it's now two eco districts who've got the awards, but we're on the way. And just to say that if you're wanting to know what you do to move beyond bronze, by the way, because we've got to bronze and we've just asked the question, what do we need to do to go towards silver? Nobody knows. It's not yet decided. So the problem at the moment is that they didn't really, I think, expect. I've just got a thing appeared in front of me, my nose. So I'm getting a problem here. But anyway, I hope I can get rid of it. Anyway, yes, we asked them, what do you need to do toward a silver award? And they couldn't tell us beyond one element. And that's partly because it's still in discussion between A Rocha and the Methodist Church. So that's still to take place. But awards are wonderful, but they're not the heart of what we're about. We've reviewed and looked at other districts, and some of what other districts are doing is way ahead of where we've got to, I think. But I think the award provides focus, it provides publicity value, it also declares loud and clear to society at large that we are concerned. So while the Eco District Award has helped us forward, we recognise that the district has so much more to ensure that we are doing all we can to address the climate and environment emergency. And so what I want to hope to do in the next 15 minutes is to take a look at a number of possible areas of engagement for a district that will take things forward. Some of these are vital. Others you may say, well, that's nice, but we've got other priorities. But just to take, well, I've mentioned local authorities. The local authority in the area where I live declared a climate emergency in 2018, and the current administration set out its aim just before the pandemic to get every department to ask the question, how are we addressing the climate emergency? Now, they found it an incredibly difficult journey, but what they were aiming for was what I would call the stick of rock image, where whatever area of the authority's life you looked at, it had climate emergency written through it. And we, as districts, we need to ingrain our care for environment into the whole life of our work, whether it be training local preachers, whether it be manse provision, whether it be grants policy, whether it be stationing. Now, there are, of course, areas where the link is not likely to be achieved, but we need to live with climate care as a vital element of what we do. And the first thing I think you need to do is nobble your chair of district. Sorry, Andrew, but things like policy committee agendas and synod agendas can be deeply affected by the chair. And if the chair is behind you, then you're on your way. And then you need to get DPC on board, or your policy committee, or whatever the equivalent is. I know things, again, are shifting a lot. That's an ongoing task, because in some ways it's easy to get an in-principle agreement to give creation care a place, but it's the month-by-month implementation that's needed. And then, of course, Synod needs to be behind this. The focus for us in the early stages was getting the district environment policy in place. And I know, Southampton, you've got your policy in place, but we found that the policy has to be dynamic and it has to be evolving. Actually, one exercise that would be helpful would be to compare various district environment policies. It might be somebody in Connection could put this all together and help us see what we've each got down, because it may be the things that we've missed. Now, our policy in our district includes an overall commitment from churches and circuits to take action and to embed environment in our work. And these are broadly along the eco-church lines, but what we've asked for and we got from Synod was that there was a commitment that churches and circuits would work on this. And what that's trying to say is embed it in your whole life. Now, that's easier said than done, because a lot of people will, say amen to that in Synod and then do nothing about it. But we have at least got a piece of paper we can wave and say Synod said, which is helpful. And then our policy includes a series of broad aims that are to be achieved and a series of practical actions to take that forward. Now, there are issues, particularly in the gap between local churches and the district. The vital part is to have an enthusiastic team at district level. And one other nameless district, which I was talking to a while back, clearly it had an eco champion, and that was it. And that eco champion was clearly working on his own and sounded as if he was very close to burnout on it. You need a team. Now our policy has evolved so that we now require every circuit to have a representative on our eco team. It's taken 2 years to achieve that, but we are now fully representative of the 9 circuits and 8 circuits in one area in the Bristol district. And that's necessary in order to ensure the trickle down, so that people are hearing through their representative this regularly reported on. But also, of course, we need local churches on board. Part of that relates to the Eco Church Awards. And I think these are a vital way of giving churches a framework, even if they never achieve the awards. And district support for that can take the burden off and can start to ingrain creation care into the life of circuits and churches. Now, currently, the numbers keep varying, but we think we've got about 165 churches in the Bristol district. Of those now, 41 Methodist churches and 7 LEPs, of which we're part, are award holders. We're a bit slower than the Southampton district in getting our first gold award, but we've now got it. And we've then got 23 other churches who are registered. So about 43% of the churches in the district are now involved in looking at either they've got an award or they're working towards one, or at least considering the questions. So it's about that process of embedding and ingraining creation care into the district's life. But one final shot at district administrators and things. Please, when you put the environment on the Synod agenda, please not in the graveyard slot. We often get to the point where we've got to the end of the afternoon. Oh, we'll do the environment now. It's more important and more vital than that, and we need to keep pressing for this to be an early item, an important item, not just an afterthought. In our district, we actually have a requirement that our policy is reviewed every year. And that means that we do have an automatic slot every year at one of our synods. So that's the first bit, I think, is to ingrain creation care into the district's life. The next bit is to encourage change. Now, I've picked out a few shots there, and I just love that photograph that you can see on the side of a bishop and a dean walking on Chester Cathedral roof with solar panels. It just sort of took my fancy when I found that online. But part of our function as a district team is to ask questions that make churches and circuits look at what they're doing. Now, if I can give you some examples, travel is one we've done quite a bit of work on. We decided to ask the question, how far are we traveling on church business? And we asked the circuits for figures, and what we found shook us. Because in our district, in the 2 years before the pandemic, Methodist ministers mainly, and a few others, were traveling 280,000 miles a year. That is 10 to 11 times around the world. And you can just imagine the massive carbon impact of that. Now, that figure was wonderful to have because it gave us a shock tactic to be able to say, look at this is ridiculous. Why are we traveling so far? Now, we were helped by the pandemic because then mileage dropped by over 75%. We've kept doing the task, and it's now back up to about 56% of what it was pre-pandemic. But that is at least a 44% drop, and that's encouraging. And the pandemic helped us because it showed we could survive on less mileage, but it also introduced us to this wonderful thing called Zoom. And suddenly we found we could do meetings in different ways. Now, in the Bristol district, the district grants committee had a pattern of having a centralized meeting, inviting people to send their paperwork in, and then coming for a meeting where they would present for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then they would drive home again. Now, that could mean traveling for at least 4 hours to do 15 minutes. I did a quick calculation on the recent district grants committee, and if we'd still been doing that, the people attending that meeting would have traveled just short of 500 miles for that one meeting. And my estimation is that's about 110 kg of carbon dioxide from one meeting. But by being able to say to the district, to the circuits and the churches, this is what you're doing with your travel, look at the impact 10 times around the world, we've managed to start to get people to ask questions. We've done the same with housing. We've looked at the EPC ratings of our manses. Only half of our manses have actually got an EPC rating. And what we discovered is that of half of those that have got one are below the required C rating. And so circuits are beginning to swing into action to address that, to ask some serious questions about how we care for our manses, how we care for our ministers, but also how we care for our environment. And then looking ahead, we're going to have to take action in relation to the measurement of carbon footprint within our churches. Now, I know the next webinar is with Adrian from Climate Stewards and 360 Degree. And I have to say you're in for a good time because we've had him do a webinar for us and he is very, very good. So look forward to it. But all of that is trying to hold up a mirror to churches and circuits and saying, this is how it is in your life. What can you do about it? So that's the next thing. It's encouraging change. The next area is to look at equipping and education. We should get a. Sorry, still struggling with them. like your district, we've run a number of webinars. We started with one with David Bookless, who was with A Rocha, still is with A Rocha International. And then we've done 5 more webinars, mainly emphasizing practicalities. And our range of topics has been measuring carbon, campaigning, land use for wildlife, preaching on the environment, and quick wins on energy saving. We've tried to be as practical as we can to help people. Some of them have been very good, some of them have been awful. And we learned from that background. If you want to know who was awful, I'll let you know in private. But an area we found more difficult to address is how we influence education in the church. The Eco District scheme asks us to have sought to ensure that environmental issues are embedded within the curricula of ongoing presbyteral and local preacher education support. We can't, because it's not within our power to do it. So we've had to ask some serious questions about how we can, with the connection, how we can embed more about the environment into local preacher training and into the training of our ministers. But any ideas you have of how we could perhaps develop training on this would be great to hear at some point during this evening. The next area is our exchange of experience. And again, this has been a vital part of what we're doing. So it's going to appear in a moment. What we're increasingly finding is that we get emails asking questions. We are thinking of doing X, maybe solar panels, maybe heat pumps, maybe fuel providers. Can you put us in touch with people who have done this? And we've tended to respond ad hoc, but one thing we think we probably need to do as a district is to create a resource list. This is one of those places where districts come into its own. If you're a circuit, there may be no church in your circuit with a solar panel, but there's rarely a district without a solar panel. And so I think you can, if we can, the district has that greater weight and greater breadth of experience to be able to do this. We have to be careful because experience is not always transferable. For instance, one of the churches in our circuit has got solar panels, but they were put in 2010. And the technology has changed, the feed-in tariff has changed, and much else has changed since then. And more and more, I think that the district has a major role in enabling that exchange of experience, so we can learn from one another's successes and also learn from one another's mistakes. And I think that would be, another area I would firmly recommend to you. The next one is informing. Bring that up. Slide's not coming up. Oh, yes, it is. Informing. Now, you may say, he's gone mad. It's just that the preacher in me suddenly started to recognize that my first 4 areas all started with the letter E. So I thought that this one perhaps ought to as well. But we have tried to inform as much as we can people about what's happening elsewhere in relation to the creation care, and also celebrating what's happening in the district. As a district, we've perhaps not been as daring as we might be, and we simply have a district newsletter, which is printable, but can also go out by email, but also have a Facebook page, but we haven't gone beyond that. We need perhaps to get our website up a bit better, the district website, to carry more. But that allows us to celebrate new awards of eco-church status, but also to ask some serious questions. So the recent edition that we had of our magazine, which is our newsletter, which has just come out, has an article on challenging power. We have congratulations to New Eco Circuit and to New Eco Churches, an article about various activities across one circuit, info about ecumenical network, a reminder about money, information about COP28, and sharing of a flight-free holidays day, which one of the churches is holding. But the aim is really to get people saying, we could do that. So that we start to break down that sense of impotence that many people feel. So that's the next one. The next one is engagement. And I think this is perhaps one where, as a Bristol district needs to up its game. Our districts represent thousands of people, and we have the power with those thousands of people to influence decision makers. And it's one of the places where maybe chairs of district have a greater entree than others, where they can speak to MPs and express our concerns about the direction that environmental action is going. Some MPs will probably be more receptive than others, and I won't name the gentleman I have at the moment, but he's not very receptive. But we need to grasp the moment whenever it comes, and we've got that moment coming up with COP28, and we need to express our views that aren't always being heard. So I think the districts have a unique position to be able to really hit home with our political leaders. Maybe also we need to be in deeper conversation with some of the agencies like Christian Aid and Tear Fund, who are good at this sort of thing, and find ways that we can join in. But we also need to poke them to do more. And under this heading of engagement, I also wonder whether we need to do more with our world church partners. Carbon offsetting could happen in those churches. One suggestion that came up at a synod, and we've not really yet managed to take it forward, is when a church is trying to carbon offset and can't manage to get to net zero, could it actually offset by sponsoring a project in another country? And it's something which our circuit has a link now with Rwanda. And it struck me, I went to Rwanda about 18 months back, and it struck me that the major hospital there had no solar panels on it. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually in some way link to a church, a hospital like that, and provide it with what it needed? And I know, am I right in thinking that you've got a link between Zambia and the district? I noticed there's quite a lot about that. It would be good to hear sometimes from our ecumenical partners, our global church partners, what they are doing, what the problems they face, to hear their approach to things. One of the richest experiences I had in about 2004 was that our church in Cornwall had a three-way conference with representative from India, Zimbabwe, and England. And that was a rich exchanging of ideas, and we need to do a bit more of that, I think. So we need to engage. The next thing I think I put down is ecumenism. I've put this mainly because it's something that we should be doing as a district, but which we haven't really addressed. There is ecumenical networking taking place over the whole area of creation care, but the district has that ability to be able to relate to diocesan levels and to regional levels, which circuits and local churches don't have. Some of this has happened. I was included as the ecumenical sacrificial lamb when Bath and Wells were developing their environment policy. But the problem, as you can see from this, is our pattern in Bristol. We relate to 4 different Anglican dioceses. And I think if I looked rightly on the map, you actually relate to 5. And then we've got the Clifton Roman Catholic Diocese, the West of England groups. So there's a lot going on, and it's not an easy thing to do, but I think I'm challenged now to go and discover what is actually happening amongst our ecumenical partners. At least that would show some interest, and it might start to develop us doing more together. The next one I've got down is the economics, finance. Experience is different in different districts. We just heard, talk a little earlier that districts are varying in size, but how do we use our district advance fund? Now in our district, we've encouraging people who want to go for large projects with an environmental impact to apply through the normal advance fund path. But we picked up an idea from the Wales Synod who have an environmental scheme, and we've now adopted one under our District Advance Fund. It's not a ring-fence scheme, but it has different criteria, and it's specifically for environmental issues. But what we say is, if you've got a small environmental project, up to a total spend of £5,000, the first 1,000 the district will cover, and then for the next 4,000 it will be match funding. So you can get to a position where you've got a £5,000 scheme, and 3,000 will come from the district, 2,000 from the church or circuit. Now we can see that being used, for instance, for putting maybe urgent vehicle chargers into manses. It could be used for developing land. We've actually had our first application under this scheme, and that's to fund an event, which is an arts project in one of the churches, which is going to be taking Eco Church out into schools and enabling schools to respond to the environmental crisis. So that's the area of finance. And I know that there was something in the recent connectional email that the Manchester district has just come up with a scheme whereby each circuit is being encouraged to find an environmental project that can be supported by the district. So that's another use. And I think, sorry, Timothy, I don't know, are you North Yorkshire? Because I think you've got a scheme, haven't you, of funding as well? Am I right?
We're Yorkshire North and East. So
right.
it's North Yorkshire and East Yorkshire.
Yeah.
We have a grant funding enabler, a full-time person who works on gaining grants. And so we've attracted a lot of external funding, and most of the district funding is used to match fund that. So, and we tend to do projects that are multi-church because it's easier to do a piece of work for 7 churches than the same piece of work for 1 church. So we work with churches to sort of bundle them together, and we go for big amounts rather than small amounts, and just a very different approach, I guess.
Thank you. So the final one, my imagination ran out here. I couldn't find an E for this one. The final one is hopefully coming up. Linking to the connection. One of the prime functions of the district is the shared connectional policy with circuits and churches, but also in expressing what's happening more locally to the connection. And I think we need to be pressing a lot more to the connection to say, this is what we need, this is what is happening in our districts. And the districts have perhaps more power than an individual circuit. There's a lot going on, but at the moment, I have had a conversation with Hamish Lees, who's at the connectional level. They are working on this question of getting the eco district beyond bronze, and hopefully they'll get on and do it. There are conversations going between global relationships and climate stewards. There's ongoing work on trying to define what we mean by net zero, because there seems to be quite a wide definition of what net zero means. And that's particularly going to be so in how you calculate your carbon footprint, because there are different scopes that are applied to calculating your carbon footprint. And I think Adrian will talk about that at your next webinar. Investment policy is under review, and the carbon footprint measure is not yet integrated into the annual returns. So there's a lot happening at connectional level, but we need to be feeding back as much as we can. So that's what, as a district, we see ourselves doing, and the possibilities that are there. All this really needs to be informed by those in the district who say, that will work where we are, that won't. We may not be sure always what districts are for, but we've got a district, so why not use it to make an impact on creation care? So just to recap on the 9 areas where the district can make an impact, it should come up here. The district can act on ingraining in district life, encouraging change, equipping and education, exchanging experience, informing, engagement, ecumenism, economics, and connectional link. And part of that we're doing in Bristol. Part of it, I think we've still got to get on and get a lot better at doing. So I'm going to look to John now. Do you want to take a break now, or do you want short time for question and answers? Or
I think perhaps we would take our 10-minute break now.